There's a particular kind of dread that settles in your chest when something feels wrong but you can't name it yet. Not fear. Exactly. More like a cold stillness, the way the bush goes quiet right before a storm rolls in off the coast. I've lived long enough to know that feeling. And the one time I ignored it nearly cost my son everything. My name is Gerald. I'm 63 years old, retired from 28 years working in logistics out of Brisbane. And I'm the kind of man who believes in plain speaking and strong tea. I'm not superstitious. I don't read signs in the clouds or put stock in gut feelings without evidence. I'm practical. Maybe to a fault, my late wife Margaret used to say I had the emotional range of a spirit level. She wasn't entirely wrong. But when you raise a child on your own for 11 years after their mother passes, something changes in you. You develop a kind of radar you can't quite explain. You learn to read the silences between words, the slight hesitation before a smile, the way someone holds their fork when they think no one is watching. You become fluent in the language of things left unsaid. My son, Daniel, was 31 when he brought Carla home for the first time. I remember thinking she was polished in the way that expensive furniture is polished beautiful on the surface, and you can almost smell the effort that went into it. She had a laugh that arrived exactly on cue, a handshake that was warm without being familiar, and eyes that were always watching. I told myself I was being uncharitable. I told myself I was one of those fathers, the ones who could never accept any woman their child brought home. So I kept my mouth shut, and I poured the wine, and I said all the right things. They'd met at a conference in Sydney 18 months before the dinner I'm about to describe. Daniel worked in financial consulting, and Carla was, as she put it, in private wealth management. She had an apartment in Neutral Bay, drove a white Mercedes, and wore jewelry that didn't jangle. She was 34. Confident in the way that people are when they've never had reason to doubt themselves. And she looked at Daniel the way you look at something you've decided to acquire. Again, uncharitable. I know. I was trying. They got engaged in October, which I found out about through a phone call from Daniel that lasted 4 minutes because he had another call coming through. They were planning a wedding for the following March. Fast, I thought. But then, at my age, you learn that love moves at its own pace, and it's not your job to set the tempo. The dinner I'm about to tell you about happened on a Thursday evening in late January. It was the kind of evening that Brisbane does well, warm but not brutal, with a breeze coming off the river that made everything feel slightly forgiving. Daniel had booked a restaurant in the city, one of those places in a converted warehouse where the wine list is longer than the menu, and the serving staff know words like provenance and reduction. Not really my kind of place. But Daniel had chosen it for Carla, and I understood that. The occasion was meant to be a celebration. Daniel had just closed a significant deal. I didn't fully understand the details. Something to do with restructuring a superannuation fund for a regional council, and Carla had apparently played a role in connecting him with the client. So there was a mood of mutual congratulation in the air when we sat down, which, I suppose, made what followed feel all the more jarring. There were 4 of us. Daniel, Carla, myself, and Carla's older sister, Renata, who had driven down from the Sunshine Coast and who I was meeting for the first time. Renata was quieter than her sister, softer around the edges, less rehearsed. She had kind eyes and she asked me genuine questions about my work, my life, the things I'd done since retiring. I liked her immediately, which in hindsight tells you something about the evening. We were perhaps 40 minutes in, midway through our entrees, when Daniel's phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at it, frowned slightly in the way he does when he's trying to decide whether something is urgent, and then excused himself. 2 minutes, he said, already pushing back his chair. It's the Melbourne client. I won't be long. Carla watched him go with an expression I couldn't quite categorize. Then she turned back to the table and picked up her wine glass and smiled at me. And it was precisely then that I noticed the man at the bar. He was perhaps 70, maybe older, the kind of age where a few years either side stops mattering much. Silver-haired, neat in the way that older men from a certain generation are neat, wearing a dark blazer over a checked shirt. He was sitting alone with what looked like a glass of sparkling water, and he was looking directly at our table, not glancing, not letting his eyes drift over. Looking. When our eyes met, he didn't look away, which surprised me. He held my gaze for a moment, then looked at Carla, then back at me. Then, he stood up. I watched him cross the restaurant. He walked with a slight limp, favoring his left side, and he moved with the careful deliberateness of someone who'd thought through what they were about to do. Renata was talking to Carla about something I heard fragments. Something about a property on the coast, and neither of them seemed to notice him approaching. He stopped just behind my left shoulder. "Excuse me," he said quietly. His voice was low, unhurried, with a faint accent I couldn't immediately place somewhere European, worn smooth by decades in Australia. "I'm sorry to interrupt." I turned in my chair to look at him properly. Up close, he had the kind of face that has carried a lot of weather, deep lines around the eyes, a jaw that had held a lot of tension over many years. But his eyes were clear and steady and entirely serious. "I need you to read this," he said. He pressed a small folded piece of paper into my hand, the kind torn from a notepad, the edge still slightly ragged. "Please, don't react. And please, don't let her see you read it." Before I could say a word, he turned and walked back toward the bar. By the time I'd processed what had just happened, he had collected his jacket from his stool and was moving toward the exit. Carla was looking at me. "Who was that?" "No idea," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "I think he thought I was someone else." She held my gaze for a fraction of a second longer than felt comfortable, then turned back to Renata. Under the table, I unfolded the paper against my thigh. There were 6 words written on it in small, careful capital letters. "Your son's fiancée is not who she says." And below that, a mobile number. I sat with those words for the rest of the evening, in a way that required every gram of the self-control I'd developed over 63 years of living. I ate my main course. I made conversation. I laughed at the right moments. I watched Carla across the table, the way she touched Daniel's arm when he returned, the way she steered the conversation away from her past whenever it drifted too close, the vague, pleasant non-answers she gave when I asked about her family, her childhood, where she'd grown up. I'd asked those questions before and received the same non-answers. I'd chalked it up to privacy, or perhaps a difficult upbringing she didn't want to revisit. Now, I sat with those questions again and heard them differently. Daniel was glowing. He kept catching my eye across the table with the particular expression of a son who wants his father's approval and is hoping he's earned it. That look undid me a little. He'd been that boy since he was 7 years old, always checking, always seeking, and I had always tried to be the kind of father who was present enough to catch that look and return it. I returned it that night. I smiled and I raised my glass and I told him I was proud of him. And under the table, I held a small, torn piece of paper in my closed fist. I called the number the following morning. I'd barely slept. I sat at my kitchen table in Tarragindi with the paper in front of me and a cup of tea going cold beside it, and I dialed the number at 7:15. He answered on the second ring. "I wondered when you'd call," he said. "My name is Oscar. I think you deserve an explanation." He spoke for nearly 40 minutes. I didn't interrupt him once. Oscar was 71 years old and he had worked, for most of his adult life, as an investigator, first for an insurance company in Melbourne, then independently. He'd been retired for 4 years. "He had found me," he explained, "through a combination of methods I won't detail here, after spending the better part of 3 months looking into a woman he had first encountered 18 months earlier in connection with a case involving a deceased client's estate. The woman he had been investigating, he said, was known in some circles as Carla Whitmore, but that was not the name she had been born with, and it was not the only name she had used. Over the next hour, piece by piece, Oscar laid out a picture that I had to keep reassembling because my mind kept rejecting it. Carla, or the woman using that name, had a history that stretched back more than a decade and across 3 states. She had been engaged before, twice, that Oscar knew of, and possibly a third time he hadn't been able to fully verify. In each case, the man had been successful, financially comfortable, and in each case, the relationship had ended in circumstances that left the man substantially worse off. One had lost his share in a small construction business. Another had refinanced his home and signed documents he later claimed he hadn't fully understood. The third, the one connected to the estate case that had first brought Oscar onto her trail, had died before the wedding, and questions about the distribution of his assets remained, in Oscar's careful words, unresolved. None of the cases had resulted in criminal charges. Everything had been done just inside the edges of what was provable. "She is very intelligent," Oscar said, and his voice carried in it something that was not quite admiration, but was adjacent to it, the respect of someone who has spent decades studying human behavior and recognizes a particular kind of expertise. "She does not make crude mistakes. She is patient. She builds trust over a long time. And by the time the money moves, it moves with signatures." I asked him why he was coming to me now, months into Daniel and Carla's relationship, weeks before a wedding. He was quiet for a moment. "Because I only found him 3 weeks ago," he said. "I didn't know about your son until I followed a thread to a conference in Sydney, and then I had to find you. I'm sorry I couldn't come sooner." I asked him why he was involved at all. He'd said he was retired. Another pause. "Longer, this time. The man in the third case," he said, finally. "The one who died. His name was Barry Fenwick. He was 68 years old, and he had built a small engineering firm over 40 years, and he had 1 daughter and 3 grandchildren who were expecting to inherit something." He stopped. "Barry was my brother-in-law, my wife's brother. He died thinking he had found happiness in the last years of his life. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. I want her stopped," Oscar said. "Not for revenge. For the next one. Because there will be a next one. I want to be careful here about what I describe in detail and what I leave vague, because some of what came next involved people other than myself, and it is not fully my story to tell. What I can tell you is the shape of it." I did not go straight to Daniel. I know that might seem wrong to some of you. You're probably thinking, why not just tell your son immediately? Pick up the phone, but I want you to understand what that calculation looked like from the inside. Daniel was 3 weeks from his wedding. He was, as far as I could see, genuinely in love. And what I had, at that point, was a piece of paper with 6 words on it and a phone call from a man I had met for approximately 45 seconds in a restaurant. If I called Daniel and I was wrong, I would destroy something that couldn't be rebuilt. He would never fully trust my judgment again. And more than that, I wasn't sure he would believe me. Carla had spent 18 months becoming the most important person in my son's life. I was 63, and I lived alone, and I drove a 10-year-old Hilux, and I did not have a compelling track record in the area of romantic judgment. He would think I was threatened. He would think I was one of those fathers. So I needed more. And I needed it quickly. Oscar had documents. Not proof in the legal sense. He was careful about that distinction, but a paper trail that told a story. He sent me photographs, copies of records, a statutory declaration from a solicitor who had handled one of the previous estates, a signed statement from the man who had lost his share in the construction business, a man named Trevor who was now living in a rented flat in Wollongong and who had, According to Oscar, been waiting for 2 years for someone to listen to him. I spent 4 days reading through all of it. I sat at my kitchen table until 2 and 3 in the morning, with my reading glasses and a legal pad, making notes, checking dates, mapping the timeline. I am a logistics man by profession. I spent 3 decades tracking things across time and distance, and I know how to build a picture from fragments. What I was building made my hands unsteady. The name she had been born with was different. The town she had told Daniel she was from did not appear in any records connected to her. The sister Renata, the warm, gentle woman I had liked immediately, was real. But she was a half-sister who, Oscar believed, knew very little about the full extent of what her sister had done. The apartment in Neutral Bay was leased, not owned. The Mercedes was leased. The private wealth management work was real in the sense that she had an ABN and a business registration, but its primary function appeared to be a vehicle for moving money in ways that were difficult to trace. On the 5th day, I called my brother-in-law, Colin, who had spent 30 years as a detective with the Queensland Police before retiring to Noosa. I told him what I had. He drove to Brisbane the following morning. Colin spent an afternoon going through what I'd gathered. He was quiet throughout, that particular detective's quiet that tells you nothing about what they're thinking. When he finished, he sat back in his chair and looked at me over his reading glasses. "You can't take this to police yet," he said. "Not as it stands. Most of this is circumstantial and some of it was obtained in ways that make it tricky. But," he tapped the statutory declaration, "this is a starting point. And if what this Oscar bloke says about the third case is right, there may already be an investigation somewhere that just doesn't know what it's connected to." He made some calls. I don't know who he called. Colin has always operated in a world of quiet professional courtesies that I've never fully understood. But over the next 48 hours, something started moving. In the meantime, I had to manage Daniel. He called me on the Wednesday 10 days before the wedding to finalize arrangements for the rehearsal dinner. He sounded happy, uncomplicated happy, the way he hadn't sounded in years. He talked about the venue, about the caterers, about the fact that Carla had found the perfect shoes, and was very pleased about this. He asked me if I needed a ride to the church. I said yes, I'd like that. And I said, while I had him, "Could we have lunch this week? Just the two of us?" He was quiet for a moment. "Everything all right, Dad?" "Everything's fine," I said. "I just want to spend some time with my son before I have to share him with a whole new family." He laughed, and I heard the relief in it. "Yeah, of course." "Thursday?" "Thursday," I said. I spent 2 days deciding how to tell him. I wrote it out longhand, trying different approaches, different starting points. The practical version, just the facts, the documents, the timeline. The emotional version, starting with what I felt, what I'd observed, what the man at the bar had said. The version that started with what I was afraid of losing. In the end, when we sat down at a Thai place in Paddington on Thursday, I started the only way I knew how. I put Oscar's contact details on the table, and I put the statutory declaration beside it, and I said, "Daniel, before you say anything, I need you to hear me out completely. And I need you to know that I am telling you this because I love you more than I am afraid of getting this wrong. I won't describe in full detail what that lunch looked like. I'll tell you that my son's face moved through every stage. A face can move through confusion, then incredulity, then the specific anger of a person who is being told something they don't want to be true, then the slower, quieter kind of stillness that arrives when the mind starts connecting things it had kept deliberately unconnected. I'll tell you, he didn't speak for a very long time after I finished. Finally, he said, "The shoes." I looked at him. "She was so happy about the shoes," he said. "I've been thinking about that all week. How happy she was about those shoes." He stopped. Nothing else made her that happy. Not me. Not the wedding. Not anything I said. I didn't say anything. Sometimes the best thing a father can do is stay quiet. He picked up Oscar's number. He looked at it for a long time. Give me 24 hours. I gave him 24 hours. What happened in those 24 hours, I know only in fragments. Daniel called Oscar himself. He went through the documents. He made some inquiries of his own. He knew people in financial services, and some of what he was able to check through professional channels confirmed parts of the picture more concretely than anything I'd found. He came back to me the following evening, and he was quieter than I had ever seen him. The kind of quiet that comes after something big has shifted, and there is no shifting it back. How much do you think she knows about my finances? He asked me. I don't know, I said. What has she had access to? He told me. I won't go into detail here, but it was enough that we spent 3 hours that evening making phone calls to his bank, to his financial advisor, to a solicitor Colin had recommended. Several things were frozen or restructured before midnight. Whatever had been in motion was, at least for the moment, stopped. The wedding was called off 6 days before it was scheduled to occur. Daniel handled it. I don't know exactly what was said between him and Carla. He has never told me the full details, and I have never asked, because it's his, and he gets to keep it. What I know is that she left the Neutral Bay apartment within a fortnight. The lease was not renewed. The white Mercedes disappeared from the street where Daniel had often watched it parked. 3 months later, Colin told me quietly that a fraud investigation unit in New South Wales had begun a formal inquiry into several connected matters. He didn't give me specifics, and I didn't press for them. What I understood was that Oscar's years of quiet, determined work had finally found a place to land. I think about Oscar often. I've met him twice since that night in the restaurant, once for coffee in Brisbane, once when he drove through town on his way somewhere and stopped in for an hour. He is a precise, contained man who does not waste words or emotions, but when he talks about his brother-in-law Barry, something comes into his face that is the truest thing about him. Barry Fenwick, who built a small engineering firm over 40 years and had 3 grandchildren and who died thinking he'd found happiness. I cannot give his family back what they lost, Oscar said to me the second time we met. I think about that a lot. The idea that the worst things that happen to us can still mean something, if we do the right thing with what they teach us. My son is doing well. He moved to a new role earlier this year, a smaller firm, more aligned with what he actually values, and he seems lighter in a way that I hadn't fully realized was missing before. He came for Sunday lunch last month and stayed until 7 in the evening, and we watched the cricket, and he fell asleep on the couch. And I sat there looking at him thinking, there it is. There is the thing that matters. He doesn't talk much about Carla. I think he is working through the particular grief of learning that something you loved was not entirely real, which is its own kind of loss, and deserves its own kind of time. I don't push. I'm here when he wants to talk, and I'm here when he doesn't. That's the job, but I want to say something to those of you listening tonight, because I think there's something in this story that goes beyond just my son and a bad situation narrowly avoided. We live in a world that has become very good at presenting surfaces. People can construct entire identities now, with precision and patience. Professional identities, personal identities, romantic identities, and we, as people who love the ones in our lives, often feel we have only 2 choices: either trust completely or be the suspicious, interfering, difficult one who ruins things. I want to suggest there is a third option. You can pay attention without being controlling. You can notice things without making accusations. You can hold a quiet concern the way you hold a torch in a dark room, not waving it around, not blinding anyone, just keeping your hand steady so that if you need the light, it's there. The man at the bar, Oscar, could have decided it wasn't his place. He could have told himself that Daniel was a grown man and it wasn't his business, and who was he to interfere in someone's life? He would have been wrong. Because love, real love, the kind that actually protects people, sometimes requires you to step into an uncomfortable moment and hand someone a piece of paper and trust that they will do the right thing with it. Be the person who passes the note, even when it costs you something, even when you're not sure it'll be received well, even when it's easier to look away. Because some nights, that note is the thing that changes everything. And if you're the one who receives it, if someone in your life, someone who loves you or has no reason to harm you, comes to you with a quiet concern about someone close to you, please, before the defensiveness rises up, before you dismiss it as interference or jealousy or a misunderstanding, sit with it. Ask the questions. Look at what's in front of you with clear eyes, even when your heart is pulling you in the other direction. The truth doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrives on a torn piece of paper, pressed into your hand by a stranger with steady eyes and an old grief he's decided to do something with. Pay attention and take care of the people you love.